despite as a safety regulator, I have neither a redundant nor a diverse means of bringing my presentation. So you're going to get a speech, although I have a backup system that will hopefully come online shortly to allow me to get into my presentation midstream. Kind of unique here and among the speakers in that the NRC, I think most people know, has no role with respect to the promotion of nuclear energy in the United States. I guess the simple way to put our mission is if it's safe, you can use it. So we kind of come in as, we, if anything, limit its use because we won't accept it unsafe. But as long as it's done safely, and it is, we should not impede its use. We do have a facilitative role in that sense, that we should not unnecessarily restrict the use of nuclear materials or energy in the United States. But in fact, we don't have any goal. The current electricity generation rate is about 20%. It's not part of our mission to maintain that, to increase it, or to reduce it, only to ensure that where it's used, it's done safely. I think as others have noted, it's a demanding, uncompromising technology. And in terms of an effective nuclear regulatory program, we think that you need to have an established legislative and regulatory framework, and that the regulator needs to be independent, and I'll get into much more detail on that later, and that you need to have a safety culture in the industry as well as in the regulator. And I'm going to use a set of specific examples that illustrate that later, and those examples will show how the regulator actually plays a role in that safety enhancement. And also in the NRC's framework is the licensee, which is the operator generally, has ultimate responsibility for safety of their facility. It is not the designer of the system, it is not the constructor of the plant, it is not the regulator, it is the operator who is responsible to ensure that the plant is operated safely throughout its entire life. We have what we call 5 principles of effective regulation. They're independence, clarity, openness, efficiency, and reliability. And independence, that's one we really do hold dear, and it means that we ourselves behave with the highest standards of ethical performance and professionalism. And it isn't enough to know we're independent. We try to even avoid the appearance of loss of independence. It means we make our decisions based on objective, unbiased assessments of the information available. It means we're independent not only of the industry we regulate, but of the policy-making portions of the U.S. government, the legislative and executive branches. That's why I say we don't have a role. It's a national policy issue as to how much nuclear power you want or what sort of mix. It's also, in the U.S., largely an economic issue. We're independent of that policy-making apparatus. It also has tentacles where you kind of don't expect. For example, our Department of Energy has what we call national labs that are staffed with really very, very capable people. We use those labs to help us do our technical work. However, if the staff we wish to use do work for the regulated industry, that's a conflict of interest. And even though they could probably do both things, maybe not at the same time, but they could do both things, it gives the perception that they may be biased, hence we don't use them. It's even a bigger problem for commercial consultants. They typically in the United States have to choose, are they going to work for the NRC, they're going to work for industry. It's very hard for a commercial consultant to work for both because it does give the lack of, or give the appearance that there may be a lack of independence. Openness, what we mean by openness is that we keep the public informed about what we do and why we do it to the best we can, and that they have a meaningful way to participate in our regulatory decisions. And our regulatory decisions are really in 2 forms: rulemakings, through which they submit comments, and hearings, which are normally an adjudicatory process. They have to gain admission just like any adjudicatory process. But openness does not mean agreement with the public. We are also independent of just public opinion. We listen to the public, they're ultimately our customer, but all we commit to do is to be open and allow them to participate. But it isn't a vote. We're supposed to make a decision based on the technical facts, free from those pressures, which gets to the other pillar, which is reliability. Again, these are regulations that are based on sound science, that we're consistent in how we regulate and enforce our regulations, and that consistency in the case of the NRC is largely provided through documented ways to meet our regulations in the form of reg guides and documented ways in which we'll enforce our regulations. And we do publish our enforcement policy, which explains how we enforce our regulations. And then the last piece, which is regulatory stability. This is very important to the industry in the United States because it affects the economic viability of making the investments. They're big investments. If they have no assurance of stability in how we regulate, it makes their investment riskier. But stability doesn't mean it doesn't change. But we do have controls as to how we can change it, and that control is in the form of what we call the backfit procedure, and it allows us to change regulations in three ways. One, it isn't really a change in regulations. We can always impose the compliance backfit on a licensee regardless of cost. The second and the most commonly used one is what we call a cost-justified safety enhancement. In other words, if we feel there's a necessary safety enhancement, provided we can show that the safety benefit to society exceeds the cost of the licensed entities to implement that increase in safety, we can impose it. And then the third, which is not used often, is adequate protection. Adequate protection means regardless of the cost, in order to fulfill our responsibilities under the Atomic Energy Act to provide reasonable assurance of public health and safety, we can impose those requirements. I bring up the adequate protection in particular because some of the recommendations of the staff with respect to post-Fukushima activities are going to be, appears that they'll be made on the basis of adequate protection. For safety culture, we have both external safety culture, that means the regulated industry, and internal safety culture, which refers to ourselves. We think there's a nexus between safety culture and safe operations. We think if you look at the operating history in the industry as a root cause, safety culture is frequently a contributor to the event. As a regulator, we encourage safety culture. We do not have a regulation that says you have to have a strong safety culture. I mean, such a regulation, I don't even know how you could write it, much less enforce it. We do have regulations that touch on facets of it. A LARA, as low as reasonably achievable, gets to safety culture because it affects how they operate day to day in the plant and in the maintenance of the plant. We have worker protection regulations, and by worker protection I mean that they can't be retaliated against for raising safety concerns. So those contribute to safety culture, but there is no direct regulation on safety culture. But it's up to the licensees, the operators, who are ultimately responsible to safety, to have such a culture. And I think in general in the industry there is. I think everyone in this industry understands the importance of safety. The NRC isn't the owner of safety in the nuclear industry. None of the stands out there say we're the less safe alternative, right? Everybody in this industry focuses on safety. Where we disagree maybe sometimes with industry is, how safe is safe enough? And reasonable people can disagree on that. For our own, it's important that we have an internal safety culture, that our own staff feel comfortable raising safety issues within the agency. We've done a lot of work over the past 10 years in particular on it. In the U.S. government, we have what we call an Inspector General. It's government-wide. It's not unique to the NRC. Their principal focus is on fraud, waste, and abuse, but at the NRC, they also focus on safety culture. They do a safety culture survey of the agency about every 3 years. They provide a set of recommendations to management of the agency, and we normally act upon those recommendations to improve our own safety culture. We do have defined processes for handling safety issues raised by the staff. We have just an open door policy, which is informal. The expectation is if a manager makes a safety issue through an open door policy, they will act on it, but there is no documentation required of that. We then have two formal processes, the non-concurrence process and the differing professional opinions process. Those require written documentation of the safety concern and written documentation of its resolution. The two key differences are the non-concurrence process is resolved within the line management. The differing professional opinions process forms an independent from the line management team of experts to evaluate the safety concern and make a recommendation to the office director. And the second difference is under the DPO process, that decision can be appealed to the EDO where it is finally arbitrated. There is no appeal process for the non-concurrent. Yeah, I'm not going to, at this point, no value added by going to the presentation. It allows me to skip slides and speed it up too. So I want to give a few examples that show how this all works together. First, with fuel rod cladding, and this required ultimately a regulation change to enforce, is that we were getting unanticipated degradation of fuel rod cladding as fuel burnups went up. And one of the contributing causes to that was that there was extrapolation of the database of fuel cladding damage that really couldn't be supported. As a result, a research program was initiated to look at higher burnups. As a result, we actually had to change our regulations that govern fuel cladding to